Hey guys, this is Luke Johnson from Noetic, the Philosophy of Humanities Poetry Teaching app. I am joined by the illustrious C.J. Eller and the inimitable Jordan Cline. Tonight we are going to do a continuation of our series of literary theory. We'll be discussing Foucault's What is an Author, which is an essay in response to last week's essay, Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author. How's my French? Is it convincing to anyone?
Oui.
Yeah. So this was written in 1969 and given as a lecture at the Collège de France. That doesn't really make any sense, but my French pronunciation. Many and like I said, it's a response to Roland's article that we talked about last week that was featured in 1967, I believe, in the journal Aspen, and then a year later in a French publication, which the name escapes me. And this lesson is all about trying to get a handle on the privileged moment of the notion of the author coming into being. And Barthes talked a great deal about how the author sort of emerged as this fictional projection, or this thing that we presuppose that was buried beneath the text that we had to exhume. Foucault, he'll talk a little bit about how that idea comes into existence. He feels like at this point in time, when he is giving this lecture, that the literature is pretty well established, that the author is in fact dead. But like Nietzsche, what he really wants to do is examine the reverberations of the murder or the suicide of the author in some cases. When we look at Flaubert and Proust and Kafka, people who are intentionally trying to kill off any trace of their individuality, he's not really interested in sort of a socio-historical analysis of the author's persona, but he really wants to explore this relationship between text and author, and how the text points to an author's appearance that may precede or exceed it, and tease out some of the difficulties that go from killing off the author that we perhaps don't really understand yet. Yeah. So that's going to be, we're going to be doing the first part of this essay. We're going to go to page 111, but that's kind of just to orient us in what we're doing. Would you guys like to say anything as I set the stage here a little bit?
You've set the stage. Let's continue on.
I will continue. I don't know when the stage stops being set, but but maybe the stage has been set, and maybe what happens after you set the stage? You say the first words in the
which
play?
I believe is, what does it matter who is speaking?
Right. So he thinks that there is an ethical principle in here. There is a sort of indifference to whether or not anyone actually is behind the writing, and there are really two sources from this. This immanent rule, this ethical rule, this indifference towards the author. Most concretely, I think it's given voice on page 102. He says, "This means that it is an interplay of signs, arranged less according to its signified content than according to the very nature of the signifier. Writing unfolds like a game that invariably goes beyond its own rules and transgresses its limits." So, what he's trying to say here is that the content, what is trying to be conveyed, what may be a trace of that author, is not so important as the juxtaposition of different sounds, signifiers, words, in order to give rise to something that may appear to be beautiful or moody in our aesthetic consciousness or something like that. And then the second theme, right, that contributes to this immanent principle of indifference towards the author's death, is that writing is no longer seen as a way to immortalize the author or to ward off death. I think many people saw if I could only write one great book, I would sort of live forever in some way. And I think a lot of modern writers feel that very acutely. When you have so many people publishing so many books, there's no way to really preserve your legacy because no one's really reading you, right?
And there's also, even in the texts as well, he mentions the Arabian Nights, or as we know, the 1001 Nights, where the story is based around Scheherazade trying to avoid death because the king or the sultan or whatever she's with, after that evening, he's going to kill her off. So she has to keep telling him a story that will make him say they'll get to the cliffhanger, and he'll be like, "Oh, I got to keep you another night." So she has to keep saying stories. Stories are a way to stay alive in some respect. So cool. That's another kind of metaphor to that.
Yeah. So and what's interesting is that it's not just that, like, there's like this consensus within modern writers that we're not supposed to interpret the individuality of the author anymore. Many modern writers themselves are annihilating themselves from the text. We mentioned Flaubert and Proust and Kafka. Proust, we examine in Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author, uses a multiplicity of viewpoints within his authors to make it so confusing that you can't really tell what his perspective is. So Foucault wants to examine the reverberations and the ramifications of these two ideas that give rise to indifference towards the author. That being the first idea, that it's just an interplay of sound and words, and the other idea that there is something, anti-theological, an atheistic jubilation about the death of the author. So let's look at some of those concerns, right? Because and what exactly is the concern? Why is this a problematic concern? Do you want to pick up on that on page 103, maybe?
Sure. You mean why?
Why he thinks that this move towards indifference towards the author is like maybe problematic in some way. In some way, it privileges the author even more, right?
Right. I mean, the first. So we're saying that even with the death of the author, there's still some sort of semblance of the author that we can still see. It might dilute the implications of the quote unquote death of the author. And I think the first thing is the idea of the work, right? Or the idea of like, what is a work of, say, literature? And Foucault says, this is a very common thing that we have to do. This is a task of criticism in some respect, and even of putting compilations together. It's like, what is the oeuvre, or I don't even know if that's the way to say it in French.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, what is the oeuvre of the author?
Oeuvre. Man,
this is also a lesson in French.
We are learning French, right? We're probably teaching people it all wrong. People who actually know how to speak French are probably like just totally upset.
The body of work. That's one part. If you're dealing with a writer, you have to designate, okay, what is the work? And therein lies the problem, is that if we're dealing with the work, we have to be able to identify what did the author write. We can't just do a work for work's sake.
Right.
Because a work isn't in a vacuum. It has to be made.
Yeah, and there's like, a work isn't like spontaneously generated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the problem, right? Like when we become fixated on the work, we realize that we don't really know what a work is.
Yes.
All right? Like, because Jordan, what might be some examples that we think are works? You said something about spontaneous generation was not a work. What did you have in mind when you said that?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I was kind of just... Since we were talking about the Iliad and the Odyssey, I was thinking like a poem.
Well, I think a poem is not necessarily spontaneously generated. I would think like.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you were asking something that like wasn't.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I might have totally misunderstood.
Okay, so what I want to say is that we would say something like signing the bill at the restaurant or whatever is not a work, or giving somebody a birthday card and saying, I hope you have a wonderful birthday, is not a work. That is something spontaneously generated. Whereas we would say a poem, the Iliad, the Bible, or something like that these are works, right? But in order for us to distinguish work from non-work, we inescapably trace back authorial intent. And when we inescapably trace back authorial intent, so lives the author.
Right.
So we have this, so long as the concept of work is something that is unsteady and uncertain, we grip to the author all the more, right? Like, so, and this gives us like a big problem, right? With not only does the uncertainty of not knowing what a work reinforce the idea of an author to begin with, right? We're left with this practical problem, a technical problem of what constitutes a work, right? This plays out, like, for instance, in Nietzsche, like when he dies, like, do we think that his journals, his notations, like, are those works, or are those sort of the spontaneous scribblings that were never meant to be seen for anybody and aren't properly considered to be works? And we have to kind of we need to get our head around this, because if we don't, editors, like, will have no way to determine what's in the Nietzsche canon, the Kafka canon, the Shakespeare canon, the Aristotle canon. Like, if we just go and cast this really wide net and say everything is a work.
You know what's so fascinating about this is that we're reading something now that, along with doing this work now, that probably wouldn't be considered a work under those guises, which is Marcus Aurelius' Meditations,
right?
Which are just scribblings
to himself
by an emperor to himself. Would those be considered? Was that considered a work, or is that just scribblings?
Yeah,
right.
I feel like now there's also the question too of what does work mean in the digital age.
Totally.
Yeah, like that's kind of is a text message a work? Well, running late. Be there in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Is that a work?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely...
Because we leave a virtual paper trail, wherever we go.
There are definitely, like, Facebook statuses that I have sort of labored over for future generations to understand my genius, and then other ones where I've been like... eating pie.
Yeah, LOL, going to the movies.
Yeah, but it's very fascinating because even if you take something like Twitter, for instance, which could be even read as aphorisms. So if you think like the aphorisms of like was it La Rochefoucauld? I can't remember how to pronounce his name. It's French. French aphorism
more French
writing.
Words.
Yeah, but like we all need to study French. That's what it sounds.
But just like those who write aphorisms, for instance, and put them in works. I mean, Kafka even had a book of aphorisms. I don't think that were published, but like, are those is that a work in and of itself? So then, could somebody's Twitter feed be a work? Is somebody's history? Is somebody's browser history a biography?
Yeah, I guess that kind of begs the question of curating content on social media, because then if you really carefully cultivate a social media page like an Instagram or whatever, then that's also like intent.
Yeah.
Which also is like ultimately traced back to an author,
Yeah, so you guys are getting at, right? Like both of you are highlighting in a brilliant way the difficult nature of defining what a work is, and you keep slipping in this word intent, and you can't have intent without an agent.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
And so the author lives, right? So we see this tension that Foucault is pointing out to us, that it's not so easy to say the author is dead. Is it really?
Yeah, you can't
is it really
collapse an author, because then they just kind of maybe just melt into the work.
But wait, guys, what if actually literature was this inspiration? It was this transcendental spirit that lived on. That my Twitter feed is actually from inspiration from the Twitter gods themselves, and I just endow myself with this inspiration, and it's not me, it's the Twitter gods themselves.
My Instagram is from a divine spark.
You guys are social media.
Compulsory, photographing my food.
Yeah, and that's one thing Foucault says, right? Where it's like, okay, well, what's the second thing? Divine, that writing is transcendental, and it is this thing that goes on forever, and that we can't really grasp, so therefore the author is dead.
Right, like teasing, because we talked about this a little bit more. Like, you guys sort of become social media prophets and prophetesses or whatever, like where you're just sort of reading off this transcendentalized, if that's a word, absolutized writing that has been elevated to this really high theological status, right? So that we're all kind of just like, intermediaries for something much bigger than ourselves.
So an author would be dead then, right?
Well, maybe the temporal instantiation of it, but we might be traced back to. We might have to sneak in. We might have to admit that some larger theological conception of God is there. And I don't think Foucault makes that point himself, but I think that's kind of what he's trying to say if we elevate the writing to a transcendental status, and we find that when we talk about writing, we can't help but talk about intent. How could you have transcendental writing without having a transcendental source of that writing, right? Like,
there needs to be some vessel.
Right, yeah. And
or some sort of agent,
yeah, there has to be a first mover. of some sort. No, I'm taking some creative license there. But
we definitely are.
That's what I think he tends to be saying there, and I find that to be reinforced on page 104 when he says, giving writing a primal status seems to be a way of retranslating, in transcendental terms, both the theological affirmation of its sacred character and the critical affirmation of its creative character. Now, he doesn't come out and say God, but I mean, I am kind of reading between the lines there and seeing God for myself. So, we've got these transcendental barriers to the author's disappearance with the problematizing of writing and its elevation to transcendental status. Yeah. So, what we have to do is get a better understanding of what the author is, because Foucault is not necessarily, he may say that like a certain type of author is dead, but like a new authorial function emerges, right? And it may have somewhat of a ghostlier, harder to pin down nature than like our flesh and blood correlates that are Luke, CJ, and Jordan.
Right.
And we'll have to talk about what is the difference between, say, the name Shakespeare as it corresponds to a single individual and the name Shakespeare as it's thought of within the body of literature. Now, Shakespeare would be a proper name that would have a one-to-one correspondence with something in the world, like the bard with an earring or something like that. But when we talk about an author in the context of writing, he says this that it's going to have more than one signification. And he says this on page 106. The links between the proper name and the individual named, and between the author's name and what it names, are not isomorphic and do not function in the same way. There are several differences. I want to read that again because I think it's really important. The links between the proper name and the individual named, and between the author's name and what it names, are not isomorphic, do not function in the same way. There are several differences. So, going on with our Shakespeare example, right, there could be the Shakespeare, the man that has the earring. That's one level of signification or designation that could be had there. But then we could find out that Shakespeare stands to be this sort of fictitious entity that comes to encompass all these works, whether he wrote them or not, right? There's this great dispute. You may know something about this from a history perspective. Don't they think that someone else wrote some Shakespeare plays?
Francis Bacon.
Was it Francis Bacon?
I don't know if it was Bacon, but I do know that it's like very contested whether or not if he like wrote the full corpus of his
Sure, or maybe if it was like Christopher Marlowe had a
I think that's the one I've heard.
Yeah,
but I've heard Bacon Marlowe as well. It's just like Francis Bacon would have
the guy that invented the scientific method. They think he also wrote plays and stuff.
Yeah, I mean he's not all strictly.
I know they did everything back then. Yeah, they valued their Renaissance men.
Yeah. But that involves all these different people, right? That in that one name, we get all of these different names, and that if we were to prove that Shakespeare was more than one person, or it was this pseudonym, then that means it could have been tons of people. Right. While if we just said, "Oh, Shakespeare didn't live in that house over there on that street," then that wouldn't really affect the man who, or the author function, wouldn't affect the name of the author who. Right.
If you got some sort of historical factoid wrong about Shakespeare, like if his earring was in his right ear or his left, or it doesn't change anything. But if we find out that he wrote the Oregon, right? Is that how you say that? That Oregon, Francis Oregon. How do you say that book by Francis Bacon? Or developed the scientific method or something like that. Our conception of what Shakespeare would expand or diminish if we found out who's this other person,
Christopher Marlowe.
That those revelations would shrink and expand what our conception of Shakespeare is.
So the author's name is more than just a proper name.
Yeah,
it ebbs and flows with new information about what works.
Yeah, and it comes to stand for a number of texts that may hang together. And even if, I don't know, like we're only going to page 111 tonight, so we'll have to figure this out. But I don't know how much it really matters if other individuals are writing, if it's like a group project or something like that. What seems to matter is that there's this stabilized authorial name that emerges communicates a certain mode of being. So you have to, like, you know that when you are going to read Shakespeare, you're like properly receptive of it. You know you're not going to be reading a comic book. Like if I hand you a book of Shakespeare, like, you know you're going to be doing some sort of work with tragedy or complicated comedy,
or even
something
Kierkegaard
like
too. I mean, I think he talks about the idea of a pseudonymous function that Victor, Merida, and Climacus and Anticlimacus have a certain function, that they're all Kierkegaard, and even though they're all Kierkegaard, they all work in a different way to portray this idea that is being presented. It is all him, but it's not all him, which is the weird part about Kierkegaard. But I think is what Foucault is getting at is that these pseudonyms function, or the author's name functions in a different way.
Right.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, so I mean, all this comes down to there's no real exterior individual to the author's name, and so then we get back to the issue that Jordan was wrestling with earlier about, well, what are we to make of things that might be spontaneous or private in nature? And he says on 108, a private letter may well have a signer. It does not have an author. A contract may well have a guarantor. It does not have an author. An anonymous text posted on a wall probably has a writer, but not an author. The author function is therefore characteristic of the mode of existence, circulation, and functioning of certain discourses within a society. All right, so when it is wrong to use the word author when talking about letters, contracts, graffiti, we're not talking about authors there. We're talking about, so the author is preserved for this communicating this mode of being with a discourse.
Yeah, I mean,
which I think is a really huge. I never really thought about it like that.
No.
I never made that distinction before.
I mean, he even goes to 107. If we go a page back, he says, as a result, we could say that in civilization like our own, there are a certain number of discourses that are endowed with the author function, while others are deprived of it. That there's this power struggle going on, that some works gain this status while others don't. And I almost think of graffiti, for instance. Yeah. That there is this push even in the 80s, 90s, when it started, and even today, of trying to make street art. Trying to push it into the gallery. And even in photography's inception, trying to make that an art as well. It wasn't given the function of art. Right. That there's some power going on even beyond what we know as power when we think of it as an oppressive thing, I guess we think of like dictators, but it can also be endowing certain things with a function and maybe not with something else. Yeah.
Is that culture that has that power of doing that? What's the driving
Foucault has his whole thing is about power, and I'm not really I don't really know much about it, but it's almost as if we're wrestling with this idea that power isn't something that someone has, it's this thing that exists
and somehow
together.
Bestowed?
I don't even really know. We might have to read other Foucault.
I think we'll have to read. I think from my cursory overview of like materials that are out there, it seems like those are topics that he explores more in discipline and punishment and stuff
madness, like that. Civilization. But power is a big thing or a big idea Foucault explores. But we're kind of seeing it here, where some even with books and authors and what is literature and what is not, or what is philosophy. Yeah. That there is some discourses getting the author function and others are not. My poor laundry list can't be a work of art. Unfortunately, Penguin doesn't want to publish it. Yeah. But that's a problem we'll explore later.
Can you? So the next thing. Thank you, CJ. By the way, I really like the fact that you brought up Banksy into this conversation, because I was thinking about it. I was thinking about Banksy earlier. Banksy might have this authorial function in the graffiti art world, because it could be the case that there are 10 Banksys. Yeah. And there's not one Banksy or whatever. I saw an article earlier this week floating around the internet postulating that one of the members of Massive Attack is actually Banksy. Huh. Yeah, but it might be the sort of thing where there are just Right, is Banksy is an idea that can't be killed.
Right.
Like Kiss. Something like that, right? That's probably not a good analogy. All right. So it's time to analyze the author function. And I only got through. He gives 4 different characteristics of the author function. And what I thought was so great about what CJ pointed out is the power struggle between different types of writing. Some claiming that they do have an author, some don't. And what's interesting is that this power struggle is not static. It's a struggle. It is a dynamic thing where we see that over epochs, certain forms of writing are anonymous, and certain other ones have that authorial intent to it and have that author function.
And it's really odd, too, because I think we think of power as, like, Luke is a dictator, and he has power over all of us interns here. But power isn't what somebody has, it's what's, like you said, it's what's jockeying around. Like, we're all jockeying for power, but it's not something that you just have.
Yeah, well, if you're, you too can have it if you have a shitty MacBook and parents overly invested in your life. You too can have all this wondrous power.
Sure, but let's go into the first.
Yeah, so the first thing is that what Foucault points out about writing is that their discourses are objects of appropriation, and that for a long, long time, right, there weren't considered to be authors behind writing, like, because I don't know, that might have been like some, he doesn't say this because he said earlier on he's not interested in doing a socio-historical analysis of writing, but, you know, I mean, before writing, like, things were just passed down and people added to things. It was a giant game of telephone. Like, right, Jordan? I would be right in saying that, like, the Iliad and the Odyssey are probably collaborative efforts passed down through time?
I'd say the oral tradition, I mean, everyone sort of adds their own interpretation or their, like, own layer of meaning to it.
Yeah, and people say this about the Bible, too, right? Yeah. Like, that the Bible is... it really didn't start to be concretized and written down until I think a 1, 2, or 3 generations after Christ. Like, it was sort of still passed around. Right. Now I'm no theological scholar, so don't quote me on that, but I have heard people say that it did take a little bit of time before they actually started to set things down. We know that, I believe the Council of Nicaea happened, in 432 AD, somewhere around there. So it was at least there. They were still and Foucault will talk a little bit about that, mostly in the next section, about how that maybe inspired our fixation with finding authors. But we'll get to that. But for a long time, there wasn't this need to pin down an author, and that writing existed somewhere in between a sacred and a profane place. They weren't necessarily foundational religious texts, but they were, like, very important to a culture, right? And it wasn't really until the 18th century, right, with the emergence of, like, civil law and stuff like that, where people became really fixated with protecting their intellectual property. I know I've learned all about this by getting into digital publishing. I'm like halfway through a JD, like, trying to figure out how to pull off this project. I'm like, what sort? Like, it's so arbitrary, right? Like, I can go and make a recording. So long as it happened before the year 1923. Like, that's like the magical year, right? Anything before that. But anything after that, no. Like you get hit, hit really big. So, but that's became an obsession as the result of how civil law progressed, that, like, people had rights and they had right to a compensation, and that they were the ones who owned this literature. But Foucault thinks there's not necessarily something bad about that, because it makes writing dangerous again, where it existed between those poles of the sacred and the profane. Well, now there's this possibility, oh my God, I may accidentally appropriate something that is quote unquote private intellectual property now. Yeah. So he doesn't seem to.
At the same time, in the 18th century, pamphleteering was just, super prolific. So you could also sort of hide behind that, and just be totally anonymous and just kind of spread stuff like wildfire too with the printing presses,
Yeah, it seems like, but the pamphleteering, right? It had more of a political end in mind, didn't it? Right, so.
But I feel like it still goes with intent. You know what I mean? It's, you want to, like, conceal or reveal your identity based off of what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, or that writing is an act, or that the idea of authorship or discourse is an act that you are rebelling against the government by publishing this pamphlet in some respect. And then maybe, like you said, Luke, you are going against the idea of ownership and of copyright by appropriating a text or by
flouting it.
Flouting it, or by plagiarizing somebody's work in some.
Well, yeah, it's definitely like asserting your identity over someone else's.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think we've adequately covered how the author arises there as a result of the progression of civil law,
sure,
or copyright law, whatever we want to say. The second characteristic is that it's something we alluded to earlier: how the author function does not, in a constant way, affect these discourses. They can flip flop, and there's a great passage here from page 109 that. He says, there was a time when the texts that we today call literary, narratives, stories, epics, tragedies, comedies, were accepted, put into circulation, and valorized without any question about the identity of their author. We've talked about that a little bit. Their anonymity caused no difficulty since their ancientness, whether real or imagined, was regarded as a sufficient guarantee of their status. On the other hand, those texts that we now would call scientific, those dealing with cosmology and the heavens, medicine and illnesses, natural sciences and geography, were accepted in the Middle Ages and accepted as true only when marked with the name of their author. And just to play this out, right? Like someone would say, well, Aristotle had this theory of how life comes to be. And Aristotle is this great, brilliant man. Therefore, it's true. Aristotle got so much wrong. He thought women had a second layer of teeth. I think we get the don't we get the homunculus theory of reproduction from Aristotle, where he thinks the individuals are already within the male, and then they just kind of gestate in the female,
something like that.
Yeah, I think that according to Aristotle, the womb just floats around the female body.
Yeah, you gotta
just kind of just wanders around. Yeah,
and Aristotle could have as far as the teeth thing with Aristotle, he could have just maybe gone up to a woman and been like, hey, we should check to see if we have the same teeth. He could have just looked. It's not like he had to go and create a crazy theory. He could have just looked, but he's like, no, I think they have extra teeth. I'm Aristotle. Yeah. I can say that.
And what's interesting is that Foucault says that's not a tribute to authority, or it's not an argument on authority, but he says we're these things that you're saying, Aristotle says, were not really formulas of an argument based on authority. They were the markings inserted in discourses that were supported to be received as statements of demonstrated truth, as if these people already proved it because
they're just really smart.
They saw it, or they saw it, therefore it's true. So it's not really arguing. I don't even know if he's saying it's not arguing from authority because these ideas have an author, so it's fine. I'm not really sure what he's getting at there, but
all I thought he was getting at there is that sociologically, people were more tempted to trust an idea based off of the person who was saying it. How long were we dogged, and maybe still be dogged, by Descartes' idea of the soul interacting with the body at the pineal gland? He's well, I conclude that because there's only one of these and there's two of everything else, that it has to all come together here. Sure. But what's interesting, all these erroneous scientific theories aside, right? What's really fascinating about what Foucault points out here is that it flipped. Mm-hmm. And that now, or somewhere around the 17th or 18th century, the obsession became trying to find the author for every text, right? And now, if we make some new discovery comes across my Facebook feed or something like that, scientists say that this asteroid has a 4.5% chance of hitting this, or scientists say that Alzheimer's might be delayed if you do jumping jacks every day. Whatever, man.
Yeah. Researchers have found that
the author no longer matters really in scientific research. Whereas we illustrated earlier how so many people were so automatically deferential to natural scientists or philosophers like Descartes and Aristotle. Whereas that does not fly. Like, if you try to release an anonymous book nowadays, like, people lose their minds and go on crazy expeditions to try to find it. I remember, like, in the... I think after Clinton was president, there was a book, I believe, called Primary Colors. And it was, like, a nationwide bestseller. And I think it was written by Anonymous. And, like... it totally captivated the American imagination to try to find out who Anonymous was. I'm not sure if they figured it out, if it was like, what's his name? It doesn't matter. One of his advisors, Dick, that guy.
Okay.
Dick Morris. I don't know if it was him or not. You guys were tadpoles. Anywho. So I thought that was actually one of the more interesting things that I thought Foucault pointed out.
Yeah, and then he goes by and then saying, well, then all of a sudden, we get literary discourses, and then we are back to the author function taking its full reign once again. Yeah. And this idea that all we now ask, and quoting Foucault, we now ask of each poetic or fictional text. From where does it come? Who wrote it? When? Under what circumstances? Or beginning with what design? The meaning ascribed to it and the status or value accorded it depend on the manner in which we answer these questions. So the authority depends on the origin of this work. Who wrote it? How did he come up with such a work? And what inspiration did he have? And where was he, when he was doing that? It's like all these different things it all goes back to the author.
And think about how many things, because we're so obsessed with the author in the writing, how many things we automatically assume to be good. Yeah. Just as we used to assume that if something came out of the mouth of Aristotle or Descartes as good, right?
Yeah.
Do we know for a fact that, like, everything that Kierkegaard wrote is good? Do we know for a fact that everything that David Foster Wallace did is good? Mm-hmm. Do we know that everything that, not to belabor the point, that Herman Melville did was good? Presumably they didn't, like, hit a grand slam every time they did it, but we are so deferential to the author function in those circumstances, we might just give them a pass.
Yeah.
Like, can Nabokov write a bad book? You think so? I don't know.
Everybody can.
Can he really, though, with our obsession? What I'm trying to say, of course he can, but what I'm trying to say is the obsession with trying to find the author and elevating the author so much, can they really do any wrong?
Right. And and can we ever have a work that's truly anonymous? Because he even says, too, that, with this obsession with the author, if we find a work that is quote-unquote anonymous, we have to find who the author is. Like, well, who is it? We'll get this work, and, like, we don't know. It's this manuscript, and we have to, do handwriting and maybe find certain stylistic corollaries, and then we say, it was this guy.
You know what's so funny is that one time when I was doing my research for my dissertation, I came across this research article that because Kierkegaard wrote underneath all these pseudonyms.
Right.
And what happened in that is that this guy developed an algorithm to run and analyze different passages of all the different pseudonyms so he could determine what was Kierkegaard's who he truly identified with of all his pseudonyms. By a mathematical formula, he could say, well, he has like a 70.8% chance of being Anticlimacus,
right?
According to this algorithm. I just think, he ran it through computers. I don't even know why it got published. It's the silliest idea I've ever heard. But I've never. Can you? But you want to talk about this fixation with finding the author? He took it to a whole new level by like. It almost sounds like something that would have been on like some like 60s like pseudo futuristic detective show. Or like, let's put this report through the machine and see who it says it is.
Or even something we have all encountered. Cite your sources.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cite your sources. Like, if you don't have an author with that quote, it's not valid. You're gonna get an F. You know, like there's some power struggle going on, damn it, and like, you know what I mean. Like there's some oppression going on with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At least if we look at it in that way too, because if there's no author, then there isn't some kind of authority to go along with it or any kind of validity to the text.
I will say that it's remarkably liberating. If the author truly is dead, I can go around walking around and saying these profound thoughts as my own.
Just appropriate.
Yeah, people are like, "Did you think of that?" I'm like, "Sure."
Yeah.
It's like when Dr. Evil like travels into the future in Austin Powers, or the past. He travels into the past in Austin Powers, and he plays like the Joan Osborne song "God Is One of Us." He's like, "Yeah, I wrote that one too." He's like, I mean, really, is the singer really there? Like, I might.
That important?
Yeah, like I might as well have done it too. All right, we digress. Just interjecting a little bit of humor because we are so funny. And the last thing we've sort of gotten at here, Jordan, I think you mentioned something about this earlier in the evening, talking about how the because so much is left up to the subjectivity of the reader, it's very easy for people to take their particular interpretation of a text and project it onto the author. He says on page 110, it does not develop spontaneously as the attribution of a discourse to an individual. It is rather the result of a complex operation which constructs a certain rational being that we call author. And so, like, all these different things that something may make us feel, we say, well, that he was trying to do that, or she was trying to do that.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's kind of like what he talks about on, I don't know, page 102, about sort of like that space. And I think what we end up doing is that we sort of end up inserting ourselves into that space and call it the author, but it's really like our own thoughts and opinions.
Yeah. And what I thought, and that, I thought that was like, cool, but I think the coolest thing was what he says here on page 110, and then what comes right after it. And we could wrestle with this. Maybe we should take it up next week. He says, we do not construct... Well, what he says is we construct authors differently depending on the discourse. And then here's the actual quote from page 110. We do not construct a philosophical author as we do a poet. Just as in the 18th century, one did not construct a novel as we do today. Still, we can find through the ages certain constants in the rules of author construction. So what he's pointing out here is like, we construct authors, but we do it differently in poetry than we do in philosophy. And what's interesting is that rings true. Because I'll tell you what, like I've been doing Kant and Hegel lately, right? Like, and
good God,
there are center, right, and left Hegelians. There are people on the right, whatever the right is in this intellectual map or compass or whatever analogy I'm using here, metaphor, that think Hegel was this Protestant St. Thomas Aquinas. And then there are people on the left who think that he was this proto-Marxist. And these are radically different projections onto Hegel and what he really is. Similarly with Kant. Kant, a lot of people think that he was some sort of crypto-atheist that ultimately wanted to destroy religion. And then there are other people who claim that he denied reason in order to make room for faith, and actually that he was a very pious person. And so what Foucault is saying here rings true with the interpretation in philosophy.
And the crazy part is that that's only you're only talking about one person, one author, and there being a difference. But we even can talk about like a philosophical author and a poet, that a philosophical author is constructed perhaps in a different way where logic and a certain argument must be formed, while a poet is more maybe in an aesthetic sphere or is judged on the imagery and symbolism. And then, talking about a poet, if we talk about an 18th century author, or dare I say a 19th century author, I mean, the merit that we judge Herman Melville is entirely different than the merit that we judge David Foster Wallace. If we compared Infinite Jest to Moby Dick, we can't really judge them on. We can't judge postmodernism and like say like American realism or anything like we can't judge those two in similar categories. They're two different authors there that have two different functions, and that's the crazy part.
So I thought that
construction.
So yeah, I thought that was probably my second favorite mind-blowing moment from the first half of this lecture, and then the third one is this right here. The third one is that he says that this fixation with trying to find the author in literary works originates with trying to authenticate the Bible. He says it's directly derived from the manner in which Christian tradition authenticated or rejected the text at its disposal. In order to rediscover an author in a work, modern criticism uses methods similar to those that Christian exegesis employed when trying to prove the value by its author's saintliness. Yes. So, like, you could determine that Moses wrote these books of the Bible if, like, certain expressions were used across it, or, like, certain other things were held in common across all the different books, and certain things could be excluded. Yes. And they were, like, because if they couldn't do that, certain councils or whatever felt like the Bible would totally come into question. I'm not sure that's the case, though. I don't know if that's the case. But I thought that was the last little bit of the notes I had for Foucault.
Sure, that's fine.
But those are, I think, my three mind-blowing takeaways. The fact that writing's author would actually say four. The first would be that we can't define what writing is, and when we encounter the uncertainty of what writing is, we are ultimately led back to authorial intent. That we place authorial intent on different types of writing, different types of discourses at different epochs, depending on what we are deferential to. That we have different ways of constructing the author in philosophy than we do in poetry, and that all of this, like, fixation with constructing an author originates from the authentication of the Bible. Yeah. These are huge ideas that we just covered in like 10 pages.
And think of the idea of that last point. I mean, the idea of apocryphal texts in the Bible. I mean, there are certain books in the Bible that are banned or dismissed as not real books. And I think that goes back to the idea of authority, that there's some sort of power working to authenticate or to dismiss certain texts as, having a genuine authorship in some way. And that's the takeaway I get, or that's the really fascinating part about reading this that I get, is this idea that there's power working in trying to make a work genuine or not genuine, or that the author function is in some way a vehicle of power, and that there's this constant wrestling between whether a work is authentic or not, and that the author is in some way a part of that, I suppose, or is in some way a crux where between this power struggle, I guess, where it's a central part of trying to figure out whether a work is legitimate or not. And that can happen in the universities, or in the church, or in the government, or anywhere. And I find that so fascinating and so cool.
It doesn't seem like Foucault wants us to give up on it entirely. He just wants us to think about who the author is differently.
Sure.
It seems like he's interested in, perhaps, I don't know, because I haven't read the second half of this essay yet.
Me neither.
But like, it seems like he might be, with emphasizing what the author function does, like still carving out a spot for it rather than denying it entirely.
Yeah.
But that is to be seen. Don't quote me on that. We'll have the thrilling conclusion next week in part 2. But it seems like he's wants to deny some aspects of the author, but maybe preserve other aspects of the author.
Yeah, and that it's not static at all.
No.
It's this game, which I think I love too. It's this little game of power that we get, which is so neat. Was there anything that you took from it, Jordan, or that blew your mind in some respect?
I don't know. I think if anything, this just kind of shows how multifaceted authors are, and for me, it's just how fluid I think the identity of an author is. So it's kind of broken down a lot of barriers for me. So I haven't said much tonight just because I just find it all just very bewildering, but kind of like, what?
I find it bewildering too. I never thought about any of this stuff before, and it's definitely affecting how I read Kierkegaard now. I'm like, which direction, which personality am I engaging now? Whereas I was just kind of like,
okay,
I'm all confused right now.
But that's the great part of philosophy, is that in some part, like some thinkers, like once you read them, you see the world in a different way. And at least Foucault does that to me.
So I think Foucault's definitely gonna, I think, give me a different approach to how I, literally before I even like read the first sentence.
Yeah, I feel disoriented.
We're doing Marcus Aurelius right now, but like, so it's who's Marcus Aurelius?
Right. I mean, isn't that what we said before? Is that a work, or is that that's just a scribblings of an emperor?
Yeah, like, is he even conscious of all the different influences that are permeating it? Like, you guys have been running the Marcus Aurelius seminar, so I don't know where you are with it, but when I was a participant in it, there were just so many different elements of ancient tradition in there. I couldn't tell what was Marcus's authentic view and what he was just parroting from somebody else.
Yeah, he has a lot of quotes thrown in there too. Yeah. And Heraclitus said this.
And maybe said this.
Yeah. Using authority, right? Like, because he said it, because Aristotle said it, it must be true, or just because I don't know, Diogenes said it.
Epicurus said this, so it's good enough for me.
Yeah. Well, I hope Foucault. I got a hunch that Foucault is going to tie up all these loose ends and just make me feel perfect about the world again. When we look at the second part, he's just going to be like, "Oh, okay, let me escort you out of this ambiguity and set everything straight, and you'll see the world anew, and everything will be simple and uncomplicated." I bet that's what Foucault does.
That's totally in the style.
We're going to get a pretty little bow on this next segment.
We'll have it all figured out. All right. Well, I don't have anything else. Look. I thought you guys did great. I thank you so much for helping me trying to understand this and communicate it. I don't think I would have been able to do it without you. So, yeah, that was awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, thanks. Go download the Noetic app. Bye.
Hey, bye.
Bye, everyone.